It took 6 rounds, but once a Hokie was drafted, 4 came off the board during the latter portion of the NFL draft over the weekend. We bring in Mike McDaniel from inside the ACC to help us break down the Hokies who were selected. Mike, we'll start with Chuck Clark, defensive back, 93 tackles, 2.5 tackles for loss this past season for Virginia Tech, taken by the Ravens in round 6.
Little bit of a surprise here with Chuck Clark. Not that he was drafted. I think everybody, or most everybody, was expecting Chuck Clark to be drafted, but it was the fact that he was the first member of the Hokies off the board. I think many of the prognosticators heading into the draft had Isaiah Ford and Bucky Hodges as the two most popular guys to get drafted first from Virginia Tech. Everybody ended up sliding down the draft board relative to where a lot of these guys were placed in the mocks from Virginia Tech, but Chuck Clark being drafted first was a surprise, but I think it's a good fit with the Ravens. The Ravens have been looking to get young in their secondary for quite some time. Chuck Clark has good size, about 6 feet tall, pretty bulky safety, very good in run support. He's a work in progress against the pass, but he's a guy who's a really solid player for Virginia Tech over the last 4 years. So a really reliable player, somebody that the Ravens will be able to use on special teams to begin with and have an ability to move him around the secondary as well, and kind of a plug and play type player. Maybe not right away, but maybe a couple years down the line when he gets some development against the pass rather than against the run. He's always been a really, really good tackler. He's just struggled in the pass defense and coverage at times, but he's a guy who's really solid. He was solid for Virginia Tech for 4 years, a guy that fans were never really mad at. You know, you could pick and choose members of the secondary where, you know, some guys would get burned more often than not. Chuck Clark was not one of those guys, but he only had 2 interceptions in 53 career games with Virginia Tech, and that was problematic. So he's going to have to develop more of a knack for pulling down some more interceptions here as he moves on to the NFL if he wants to see significant playing time at the safety position. But he's a guy who's a surefire tackler and definitely a plug-and-play guy on special teams at the very least for the Ravens.
15 picks later, Mike, the Minnesota Vikings go with Bucky Hodges, a guy that we can liken to Evan Ingram, who was selected very high in the draft. Bucky Hodges, kind of a quasi-wide receiver, caught 45 and 40 passes before his final season at Tech with 48 receptions and 7 touchdowns, scored 21 total touchdowns. And despite the draft selection here at 201, I would think Bucky Hodges is going to find himself a successful stay in the NFL.
Yeah, the lack of blocking really hurt Bucky Hodges. Now, he was a converted quarterback, played quarterback all throughout high school, only played for 3 seasons at Virginia Tech. He redshirted 1 year as well, so he was with the Hokies for 4 years. But Bucky Hodges is a guy who's still developing as an outside wide receiver. He's never really been a conventional hand in the ground tight end just because he's long and lanky, but he's gotten a little bit bigger. He's standing a little short of 6'7", about 255 pounds. He ran in the mid 4.5s at his combine, and that caused, you know, many of the mocks to put him a little bit higher on the board, maybe as a fringe 3rd round pick, or somewhere in the 4th round is where a lot of mock drafts had him. So for him to slide all the way to the beginning of the 6th round, or middle of the 6th round, I guess, was a surprise. But Bucky Hodges is a guy who can split out to the outside. He's going to catch a lot of passes. He's got the distinct size advantage at 6'7". He's going to be huge in the red zone, and a guy who the Vikings are going to be able to use right away, no matter who the quarterback is, Sam Bradford, Teddy Bridgewater, you name it. They're going to have a nice weapon on the outside with Bucky Hodges. He's still developing as a route runner, but he has the speed to play on the outside, and I think that was the one major concern heading into the NFL Combine is, hey, this guy's not a conventional tight end. Does he have the speed to win on the outside in the NFL? He certainly has the size, but will he be fast enough to run with those really speedy corners in the NFL? And the answer is yes. So I think Bucky Hodges, if he develops a little bit more as a blocker, will be a steal considering where he's drafted and considering the work ethic and what he's done at Virginia Tech over the past few seasons.
Now, Mike, 5 selections after Bucky Hodges. Fan favorite Sam Rodgers comes off the board, goes to the Los Angeles Rams at pick 206. If you look at the stat sheet, which we shouldn't concerning Sam Rodgers, you think, why does this guy get drafted? He runs for about 250 yards on the ground per year, only catches 15 or 20 passes, 11 career touchdowns. But I believe this is about special teams, and it's about this guy being a tremendous blocker and a guy that can do a number of things.
He's extremely versatile. The versatility is what got Sam Rodgers drafted. Former walk-on, ended up with a scholarship at Virginia Tech, played 53 career games. So he played every game that he was eligible to play in over his 4 seasons in Blacksburg. Made 35 I believe 27 or 28 starts in that span. So Sam Rogers is a guy who worked himself in. He's been a workhorse his entire career at Virginia Tech, earning his scholarship, showed his versatility, run blocking. He's also a guy who can carry the ball in the power running game, a guy who can catch the pass out of the backfield. He's surprisingly versatile in the open field. He has some shiftiness to him. He can make some guys miss. The fact that he's able to catch some passes, run the ball like he does in the power running game, and he's a very good pass blocker and run blocker like you alluded to. There are spots for those guys on NFL rosters. I think Sam Rogers is a perfect candidate, at the very least, on special teams at the next level. But he could be a guy who could be like a John Kuhn type player where, a really good fullback in college, went to the Green Bay Packers, had a great career there, and has continued on now in the NFL as well. I think Sam Rogers is exactly the same mold as John Kuhn, big, bulky fullback who can do a little bit of everything, pass protect, run protect, and also make people miss in the running and passing game as well, with the surprising hands that Sam Rogers shows at 5'10", 5'11", 240 pounds.
Now, Mike, we get to the classic example of star in college who may not translate to the NFL. So this is where college football fans scratch their heads. We see tight ends from Ashland University being selected in the second round. Then we see one of the most productive receivers for a top 15 program selected at pick 237, Isaiah Ford. I'm guessing there's an issue with explosiveness at the next level, but of course, he was a serious producer at Virginia Tech.
Yeah, so Isaiah Ford and the fans were losing their minds. How can you not draft this guy? Well, the reason you can't draft this guy is because he's 6'1", he's a little less than 200 pounds, and he plays on the outside. He's not a slot receiver. At the next level, you got to be 6'3", 6'4", run in the mid 4.5s. Be a guy who can pass, who can block against the run well on the outside. Isaiah Ford doesn't really do any of those things well. What he does do well is he separates from guys when the ball is in the air. He can go up and make a lot of plays in the passing game. He's got great hands, and he's an above-average route runner. And that's where Isaiah Ford made his living at Virginia Tech. So his ability to go and win in one-on-one coverage is why you take a risk on a guy this late in the draft. It is a little bit of a surprise that he fell to the 7th round. I saw Isaiah Ford more as a 5th or 6th round pick, but there is concerns about his size and the lack of speed that he showed at the combine. The 40-yard dash time in the mid 4.6s won't cut it at the next level if you want to play conventional outside receiver. But Isaiah Ford has a great ability to separate from the defender when the ball's in the air and make plays in one-on-one coverage. And I think that's why you have to take a risk on a guy like Isaiah Ford. He's made plays all throughout his time in Blacksburg, a guy who's the all-time career record holder in receptions, yards, and touchdowns at Virginia Tech. Isaiah Ford's a great football player. I think he has a chance to make it at the next level, but the size concerns and the speed concerns that he showed, not a great testing showing from him leading up to the combine, and that's why he ultimately fell. But I think Isaiah Ford has a great opportunity at the next level, given his work ethic and what he did in college.
NFL draft player selection doesn't stop with the end of the official draft. The player acquisition continues from there. I would guess that somewhere around 70 to 75 to 80% of these guys that get drafted make NFL rosters. But if you look at each individual roster within the NFL, about 25% of these guys are undrafted free agents. So the player acquisition and almost transitions from drafting to recruiting for NFL coaching staffs, trying to get these players that they have targeted already, knowing that some of these guys, they just couldn't get the opportunity to draft. And there's a slew of them at Virginia Tech when you talk about Woody Barron and Ken Ackerman, on down the line. Now, the most recognizable one for college football fans is, of course, going to be at the quarterback position with Jerrod Evans, who unfortunately decided to move on, take his shot, and wasn't drafted. Will he be given an opportunity? Definitely. 29 touchdowns, 8 picks for a team that finished in the top 15 in the country. He has the versatility, of course, threatening defenses with his legs, 12 rushing touchdowns. So we'll start with Jerrod Evans and just kind of take us through the scouting reports for some of these guys who were not drafted.
Yeah, so Jerrod Evans not getting drafted is not a huge surprise. Evans, while he had a great year at Virginia Tech, he didn't translate well to the pro level. Had kind of a long release as a quarterback, wasn't very accurate with the deep ball, was really good in the short passing game, made a lot of plays with his feet, extremely athletic player. He's a big guy, about 6'4", 250, so he's a big player. A guy who has the size to play at the next level, but had some work to do, some pocket awareness issues at times this year for Virginia Tech. had some footwork issues that led to some inaccuracy at times, but he was really good in the short to intermediate passing game, which Virginia Tech uses a ton of with Justin Fuente's offense. The fact that he struggled with the deep ball and he came out early and nobody was really expecting him to was kind of what pushed him to in a spot where he's at now, where he's now undrafted. So Jerrod Evans will get an opportunity at the next level. He made a mistake coming out early. There's no question about that. Kind of some external, I think there were some external factors. One thing that's been speculated on a couple different places is that his younger brother has special needs, and he wanted to be able to provide him with the utmost care and make more money so that he can provide for his family. And if that's the case, nobody's going to fault him for that. But I think if he waited one more year, Evans would have been in a much better position to get drafted. Maybe not as high as he would like, but at least get drafted. Now he's sitting in a position where he's undrafted, hasn't landed as of Sunday afternoon. A couple other guys got drafted or that were undrafted free agents ended up catching on into some camps here from Virginia Tech. Jonathan McLaughlin, their starting right tackle from this past season, big guy, 6'6", 6'7", really solid pass blocker, run blocker. I think he's had some footwork issues, which is especially in pass protection. He's gotten beaten a couple times by some lesser defensive ends. I think that's why he slid out of the draft, but he's a guy who could be a really under the radar, undrafted free agent. Another guy, Kenneth Canham, defensive end, signed by the Denver Broncos. Canham is 6'4". He doesn't have elite speed, but he's got great playmaking ability, which he showed in his best year as a sophomore a few seasons ago. So I think Kenneth Canham is the guy who can latch on there with Denver, maybe make a practice squad and make some noise if there are some injuries there in front of him on a really solid unit for Denver. Nigel Williams, defensive tackle, signs with the Buffalo Bills. Nigel Williams is a pretty big kid, 6'4", 6'5", about 290 pounds. He's been a plug-and-play guy for the Hokies here for a number of seasons. He's been in the rotation multiple times, whether there were injuries in front of him or if he was just in the rotation just because he was, a really solid player as a starter. Nigel Williams was a really effective player in the middle of the defense for the Hokies. A guy who Nigel Williams sat behind a good bit as a starter this year when the Hokies went with a three-man defensive front was Woody Barron. Woody Barron's got a ton of upside. He showed that multiple times this season. He developed into one of the better defensive linemen in the ACC. He goes undrafted. That was a bit of a surprise to me yesterday. I thought Woody Barron might be a guy who would be drafted in the 6th or the 7th round, just given the season that he had for Virginia Tech. He's a little bit undersized, so that's problematic, but I think Woody Barron latching on now with the Dallas Cowboys, that'll be a good opportunity for him in a defense that's trying to get younger. And then one additional guy who didn't play for Virginia Tech this past year because he transferred to the University of Maryland was Trey Edmonds. Trey Edmonds, of course, was a former running back, battled a bunch of injuries there with Virginia Tech over the last few years prior to last season. He had the huge game against Alabama in the Chick-fil-A kickoff game a few years ago. He had that long 77-yard touchdown run, kind of put his name on the map as a redshirt freshman. Developed some injury issues, but latched on with Maryland and had a pretty good year for them this past year. And now he's going on as an undrafted free agent with the Kansas City Chiefs. So great opportunity there for Trey Edmonds, and hopefully he can make the most of the next level and stay healthy.
Yeah, Woody Barron, my goodness, he really took advantage of the opportunity you just mentioned. 18.5 tackles for loss pops off the sheet for me with 5.5 sacks this past season. Nigel Williams, actually, statistically, you could provide more context to this, but statistically, at least by far, at his best season in 2014 as a sophomore with 9.5 tackles for loss, 4.5 sacks, and by far his most total tackles. And then Ken Ekanem with 22.5 sacks in his career, 34 tackles for loss, was really a productive player and pretty much matched his production each and every year, his final 3 seasons for Virginia Tech. So be interesting to see how those guys play out. And they're obviously fighting for their jobs and fighting for their careers here starting at the end of July. Mike McDaniel from inside the ACC doing a ton of work researching these guys, and he's been watching them for their entire careers there at Virginia Tech, breaking down the Hokies selections within the NFL draft and undrafted status for the rest of these guys. Mike, we appreciate the time.
All right. Thanks, Mark.